What's up, y'all? Kevin Kuhn here from Athlete Factors. This is the Athlete Factors podcast. I'm once again with my good friend and mentor, Ambrose Coleman. How are you, sir?
Great.
Excellent.
Great.
We just finished up a solid afternoon of coaching and really in anticipation for a future podcast, which I'm really excited about with an old track teammate of mine, Joel Smith, who's now a strength and conditioning coach at UC Berkeley. In anticipation for that conversation, I wanted to give just a little bit of a, not necessarily a counter perspective, but just more perspective for one aspect of the conversation that I plan to have with him, which is the specific issue of knee valgus. So, all that to say, since I think the conversation with Joel will be a little more tunnel vision specifically with regards to jumping, I just wanted to get your perspective about knee valgus in general, how that relates to predicting injury, how it relates to preventing ACL issues specifically, and just kind of your general thoughts about that whole thing.
Man, I've been thinking about knee valgus for a long time, a lot more specifically and in depth recently, just because I'm collecting way more data about things as far as the force profile for the lower extremities. And so, recently I've seen, a little bit of information on what some guys are thinking about knee valgus. Not saying that Joel has the same perspective that he shares on it, but, for instance, there's I think it's called the Barbell Doc. I think this is what this guy's name is, or his program. I don't know. But anyway, I'll follow up with you on that. But, he basically is talking about how, you need knee valgus, and at certain depths within the range of motion, especially when you're kind of getting into the hole, basically, and getting out of the hole, you need knee valgus. And I don't agree with that 100%. Let's say, okay, let's theorize this and kind of just lay this out. If there is a reason behind needing knee valgus, that reason will be because of the strength profile that's set up by the neural system, and then that gives it the strongest leverage performance. That way it can create force and velocity. So here's where I sit when I look at knee valgus. I'm not a fan of knee valgus. I think knee valgus to me is very deadly, right? Like it's basically the main factor that is the precursor to tears, to lower performance, to less leg stiffness, and then higher reactive strength index. So for me, I don't like knee valgus. And so I'm always aiming to tweak and tune knee valgus every opportunity I get. Now, the challenge that we have with knee valgus is most of the time, we have the longer an issue or challenge stands in our field, the more accepting of that we become, meaning that we start to create less answers and ask less questions and start to justify and rationale that, hey, maybe it's okay. Okay, so that's just my personal opinion.
Right.
Okay. This is not making, this doesn't make that coaches and practitioners are, it doesn't say that they're lazy. It doesn't say that they're not competent. I think it's just kind of one of those things. If you don't have an answer for something, then you start to say, well, maybe it is okay. Right? And you start to look for other examples, and then when you find those examples, then you start to say, well, there it is, there it is, there it is, right? So, hey, yeah, now I can find justification for that. And I think for us, most of the time we need to ask the right questions, and then we tend to get the right answers. And so here's what I feel like. I feel like when we're talking about Knee Valgus specifically, where I'm at right now in my career, it's the way I feel like the neurological setting presents itself is task over technique. And so really what that means for me, it doesn't ask you how, it asks what. So what do you want me to do? Okay, gotcha. I don't care about the consequences, right? What do you want me to do? I'm going to execute. And so the way I look at the neurological grouping right now is that when you go into triple flexion, and then you need to leave triple flexion and go into triple extension, basically that's a neural setting that says, okay, I need X amount of muscles, and I need to group X amount of muscles for this triple flexion to get me out of that triple flexion to a triple extension. So it's like a personnel grouping, right?
Gotcha.
If I need 5, if I need 6, if I need 10, it's a personnel grouping. So within that personnel grouping, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for a sum total of force production. So if I need, let's just say 1,800 newtons to get into that movement, triple flexion, and then get out of that movement, triple extension, then I'm going to recruit the right amount of muscles to accomplish this movement pattern. That's what the personnel grouping is, right? And so with that, it doesn't ask or care about, hey, which muscles within that grouping are the stronger ones. So let's say, for instance, let's say my adductor magnus. I find adductor magnus to be a very, very force-driven muscle, right? So let me just go ahead and switch gears on this. So I'm gonna come back to that. So basically, when we look at muscle imbalances, what we look at is the fact that muscles, we know that muscles, in order for them to function and operate, they have a certain neural drive. That's a neurological setting. So basically, it doesn't matter how strong you are, it's about the neurological setting to the individual motor units. And so that's what gives you, right, the actual ability to produce force, generate force, reduce force, dynamically stabilize. Okay, so here's how I connect muscle length with force couple relationship. So if the muscle is at, let's say, suboptimal length, okay, then obviously it's not going to be able to generate the right amount of tension based on its full capacity. So even though neurologically, when the nerves are all or nothing, that doesn't mean force capacity is all or nothing.
Gotcha.
So right, so the power is sent, but it can be robbed from an antagonistic muscle group. So that means that, like, let's say, for instance, my glute is supposed to be, we'll just keep it at 5, just number 5, right? Just for a metric. So let's say, for instance, I have a personnel group in a TFL, adductor mag, psoas, glute max, and say hamstring, okay? So theoretically, all 5 of those muscles are supposed to be at the number 5. Well, right, because I need, let's say, 25 newtons. Let's say that 5 represents 2,500 newtons, okay? So, right, so what the neural setting says is like, listen, I need 2,500. These muscles should be able to produce that amount, right? Now, it's not taken into fact that the adductor magnus is actually at 10 because it wouldn't be 10, let's say 8, because it robbed 3 from, say, the glute max.
Gotcha.
Then it robbed another 2 from the glute med, right? So now, the glute,
because it's holding more tension.
It's holding more tension, right?
Gotcha.
And so now it has a neural setting of 10. The glute med now has a neural setting of, say, 3 because it took 2 from it. The glute max has a setting of 2 because it took 3 from it so that it could achieve its 10, right?
Gotcha.
So neurologically, it robbed from other muscles within that grouping, okay? So now the length tension relationship is different, right? So now as I get, lower into that triple flexion, right, into the hole of that squat, boom, I'm going to go into a knee valgus squat, because now I'm the, Joel E. Goldthwait. I'm probably butchering that man's name, right? But the cool thing about it is he's dead and his book is out of print, so he'll never know. Okay, but I think he actually is the one we credit for creating muscle testing. But anyway, so his concept is, or one of his concepts is that, the biomechanically, when you go through a certain range of motion, through a pattern, okay, basically when you get to, so we know for a fact that the muscle wants to do three things, or the structure has to do three things. It basically has to create leverage that allows it to generate force, which gives it velocity. So the way I look at it now, based on understanding that concept, I used to think that it was all about balance. It's really not about balance, it's about stability, right? So the kinetic chain has to create stability. So then it'll start to offset these shifts of force tension relationships, right? Or link tension relationships. Then that force couple relationship will adjust to that. Okay, so that means that as I move through a certain pattern, right, the muscles that with their different neurological setting, right, will allow me to go toward the stronger muscle group, which is what Joel Goldthwait. Yeah, I'm butchering that. His observation. He said basically, when we move kinetically, muscles will tend to move the joints toward the stronger muscle group, right? So then when I heard that, I'm like, okay, then that makes sense. And so obviously one of our jobs is to make sure that we're testing, right, muscle length, right? And so once we determine that the muscle length is not optimal, right, or is optimal, right? So basically, let me just keep it simple. When we determine that the muscle length isn't optimal, our job is to put it in a more optimal state.
Right.
So in this scenario, when we see knee valgus, right, that is not mechanically the more ideal situation. So is it occurring? Absolutely, it's occurring, right? And so then the question becomes, well, should it occur? Like, we can see different examples where it does occur. All right, I give you that. But what the presupposition would be, oh, hey, you know what? That should be naturally the deal, because I look at high level athletes and they're doing it. Okay, now, all right, so I give you that. That's an observation, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah, there's a lot of things that exist that you can observe that being able to observe it doesn't justify that is the gold standard, let's say.
Correct.
Or that's optimal for everyone, or that it's optimal in all conditions. So like the way I see it is, if knee valgus does occur with, let's say, certain movements when you're not producing max force or doing a very high powered movement, you don't have external weight, maybe that's not so bad. But if you're, let's say, max squatting, or if you are
landing from, touching the rim,
exactly, a depth jump or something like that, then maybe,
or cutting,
yes,
right,
for sure, cutting.
Yeah. Just
because at that point, the line of force is, I don't think, like you said, it's not optimal. Right. So, there's a huge difference, I think, between knee valgus with both feet on the ground doing the same thing versus like a knee valgus when running. Like, when we see that, that's usually a pretty clear sign that something bad is about to happen, if it hasn't started to happen already, right? So can you tell us a little bit about how, when you do see knee valgus, like if we're doing a single leg squat test and that knee starts to cave in. It starts to deviate medially. Yeah, long day.
Clean up.
When that starts to happen, that lets us know. Yeah, gotta fish that one out. Not editing this, people.
Hey,
Deal with it.
You did well with that.
Yeah, I saw I made a mistake. You got to course correct. So when that happens with like a single leg squat test, that at least lets me know with the majority of my clients who are endurance athletes, that has downstream repercussions, specifically at the ankle and the arch, that end up causing some serious issues. So I don't want my endurance athletes to have this crazy knee valgus every time they're taking a step, just because that's going to wear them down, and they're going to get injured, or they're going to be in so much pain that they can't run. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience with seeing knee valgus and how that correlates to things like ACL injuries?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously science has kind of already pinpointed what the tear factor or the tear mechanism is. That's when the knee adducts move laterally in toward the midline, and then there is a rotation toward that midline, right? So when we get that, when it moves in and then rotate, that's a tear mechanism. Mm-hmm. Usually that involves some type of deceleration to a transition into another, pattern. So basically you're leaving one linear pattern, trying to transition into a new linear pattern, and there is a adduction and then a rotation or twist mechanism. That will snap that ACL and then now rupture the meniscus, which I'm really interested in, mm-hmm. right? Now, 90% of the time when I get an ACL, athlete in, there's always a meniscus involved. Now, that's probably been since the past 3 to 4 years. Prior to that, every time it was just an ACL. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about what's different now. Right?
Yeah.
So, and then, for the most part, those mechanisms were still the same, mm-hmm. right? The mechanisms didn't change. So, mm-hmm. So that's kind of what we see. So, when I look at it, I look at the knee that ACL is a sacrificial lamb, right? Basically, it's on the altar that is built by either the lumbo-pelvic hip complex and or the foot and ankle complex. Mm-hmm. So, like you stated already, So if that foot and ankle actually collapse and move medially, mm-hmm. and or if that pelvis, that lumbo-pelvic femoral complex starts to basically drop to the contralateral side, or if it actually shift outside of the ipsilateral side, then you're going to start to see those problems. So knee valgus, when I look at knee valgus, it comes from 4 basic things. And so, again, those are predictable patterns. That's a behavior and a kinetic reaction. So literally when I see that knee valgus, right, that's a red flag for me. That's not like one of those things that I'm socially okay with, right? Like, that's like, oh no, that's probably cool for this athlete, but it's not cool for that athlete, right? Like it's never okay, mm-hmm. right? Like that is a kinetic mechanism. It's a movement error. And so every time we have that movement error, then we're going to have a strength error, and that it instantaneously leads to tissue overload. So again, based on the athlete, they have a predetermined threshold to how much of a downgrade that they can have, whether downstream or upstream, mm-hmm. that actually is going to create that injury mechanism, such as an ACL tear. Gotcha. So ultimately, we want to create better movement scenarios for our athletes. How do they navigate their body in space? That's where our problem is right now. Mm-hmm. So it's not a strength issue. It's a strengths issue, right? Mm-hmm. Movement. Are they moving effectively and efficiently? That's going to produce strengths in how they are actually moving. So that's not just a strength. And I think ultimately, as strength coaches, you know, we view everything from this narrow lens of it's all about strength, right? When really, I think as strength coaches, we are supposed to be producing strengths. So in order to do that, we need to identify what are technically weaknesses. So as we pinpoint these things, right, then we can start to narrow or zone in on what they need. Their lack of strength in this scenario, you know, like when we see knee valgus, the number one thing they want to do is just put a band, and I say they. What we want to do,
the industry,
the industry is to strap a band around those knees and do some squats and do this and da-da-da. Okay.
Poof, it's fixed.
Right.
Doesn't work that way.
That hocus pocus is not going to happen.
Yeah.
That's an October, you know, setup. Okay.
Halloween.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Okay.
I hear you.
Yeah.
No, I think that's so true. Like, one of the reasons I'm really excited about having this conversation with Joel, and I would love it if he were here so that we could, you know, we could all have this conversation
Okay, that would
together.
be awesome.
That would be amazing.
I've seen some of the stuff that he's done on Instagram, and like the dude is just killing it. Like he's a very smart coach for sure.
No, what I love and appreciate about him is he's so open to learning. Like he's not just, okay, this is the information that we have, that's it. And like I think a lot of what he's trying to do right now is point out that fact, like, hey, industry, if we want to progress, if we want to do as much as possible for our athletes, we've got to be open-minded to this. And is there a potential benefit? Because to say that, you know, there's no appropriate time for knee valgus may not always be correct for every situation. So, and like I don't want to defend him. I want him to come on and be able to present his argument, which I'm really excited about.
Now listen, two things that I was thinking about as you were talking about that. One, just my interpretation of who Joel is without, you know, like formally knowing him, just knowing his work, is that he seems like a guy that just is fearless. He just jumps right in. You know what I'm saying? And I like that. I'd rather a guy just jump in than like, you know what I mean? Yeah, like at least know what you stand for. So I have seen his body of work that I do appreciate that. And then the second thing is, okay, so if you are going to go into a knee valgus, okay, yes, it is beneficial. Well, the system is designed to flex and give. That doesn't mean that it's optimal, right? Like that's another thing that I've been noticing about these, you know, certain guys that feel, and I'm not saying Joel says that or wants that. Like I don't even know. I'm just, you know, but the barbell doc, I know he knows. He says that for a fact. And you know, and I'm the type of person, like I'm not just gonna jump on someone's Instagram just because I disagree with, you know, their line of thinking. Or I don't line up with their line of thinking, right? So, you know, I would love to have a conversation, but I don't have a relationship with that guy. So I'm not just going to jump on there and post it. But, I mean, I have a relationship with you, so I'm going to tell you what I think about it. For sure. About this, right? But again, I think that is a compensatory pattern. No. It is a compensatory pattern, and it is designed to flex and give. And so the question isn't, should we knee valgus? Because obviously we should there should be a valgus moment. It shouldn't be a knee valgus moment. So the difference between what that is like, yes, the system is designed to flex, and in the process of flexing, it's going to give, okay? When we can identify that is a valgus from a clinical standpoint, that is not legit, right? So here's how I would put it on a scale. I would put it on a scale of 1 to 2, well, scale 1 to 5 or 0 to 5, right? So anything from a 1 to 2, that's within normal limits, right? Anything 3, 4, 5, we need to address that, right? That is, the system is supposed to pronate. We know that, and I don't know this for sure, right? This is something we would have to ask Joel, but like I think sometimes knowing that the system is supposed to, the kinetic system is supposed to supinate and pronate, doesn't, right? There is a parameter to that.
There
right?
are extremes.
Yeah.
But we don't necessarily want to go to either end of that
No
spectrum.
doubt. The goal is you want to be in the middle of the road and not on the ditch on the right or the ditch on the left.
Yeah.
Right? And so for me, knee valgus is you're off the road. Right?
Gotcha.
Bottom line, right? Because then it gets away from the soft tissue, muscular soft tissue, muscle and tendon, right? And it starts to get into more the non-elastic properties such as your ligaments and joint capsules, fascia, that type of stuff, right? So, you know, like I've worked with chiropractors for a good while. And so most of the time, especially in the early 2000s, late 1999s, wow, like late 90s, actually.
Aging himself.
Yeah, no doubt, right? Anyway, what I look at is their whole idea was we're going to approach everything through, you know, if there is a subluxation, that subluxation always leads to, you know, neural interference, right? We want to, you know, correct that neural interference. And so I'm like, okay, cool, I feel that. So why is that happening, right? And they're like, well, you know, the body is wise. It makes these corrections, right? And so, you know, that never really was sufficient for me, right? But I couldn't put it into physiological or neurological or neurophysiological terms at the time, right? Because I just didn't have that capacity. And so, you know, since then, I have been able to, you know, create the evidence, the scientific evidence to support that. And so, really, where I'm at with that position is that I think that they were wrong, you know, and here's what they were just saying. They were saying, hey, there's a neural inhibition there and a disturbance or interference. And what we're going to do is eliminate that through an adjustment to take the pressure off of the neural system. Once the neural system is relieved of that pressure, then boom, everything just magically, you know, flies. So it's almost like when the tide comes in, all boats rise, right? Man, that is awesome if it worked that way, right? Because then I was thinking like, really, if that's the case, then, you know, if the body is wise, because that's kind of how they present it. Well, the neurological system is wise. It made this correction on its own. Okay. That correction, how they were presenting it, was saying that the correction was right. It was the right thing to do. Okay. Yeah, if you're talking about morality, it was the right thing to do. But really, it was a task-dominant situation. And so based on the current situation, right, I won't discount that the interference was there. The neural interference was there. Okay, so because of that, you're giving me a task. The task is survive, move, do all these other things, right? Because all or none is happening. The switch is on. Power is going. Right. Now I'm going to divert power to wherever is most receptive. And so when I looked at it, the neurological setting is just a setting. It doesn't care about the consequences. It cares about the task. So the technique can be flawed. It'll deal with that later, right? It's what's present now. What's the best thing? Oh, I need to compensate and shift to this. All right, I'll start using this strategy. So I'll shift from a triple flexion to more of a hip hinge. I'm bending over. Can I pick up my toothbrush off the floor? Right? I don't give a damn if I need to triple flex to get it or if I need to hump my back and become a turtle and get it, right? Task. You got it off the ground, right? So that's kind of how, you know, I see that.
Gotcha. So your brain is essentially like when there's an excessive knee valgus, let's say, it's in that, you know, that 0 to 5, it's in that 3, 4, or 5. It's doing that because there isn't enough bandwidth, let's say, in the muscles that are opposing that adductor magnus.
Well, I don't think it's not just the opposition situation, it's a synergy, right? So it's a personnel grouping. So basically with that, you know, like it's the opposing muscles, it's the facilitating or prime movers, so to speak. So it's all of them, right? So when I think of it is... That's
why it's not enough to just throw the band on.
Exactly.
I gotcha,
Exactly, yeah. Because again, it's the three things that we need. Force production, force reduction, dynamic stabilization. So what supersedes everything is stability of the entire kinetic chain.
Gotcha.
Okay, so if it reconfigures itself, right? Because what do I believe? Let me just say that, not what our field and industry believe. What I believe is that posture supersedes all human movement, right? So then that means posture is saying that's a neurological setting to configure your body into a position with muscle length, tension levels or relationships. And then that creates that mobility, force couple relationship, the mobility. So the way I see it is, if you can't stabilize your kinetic chain, you're definitely not going to generate any force, and you definitely ain't going to create velocity. So you have to have those three things. That's why I think the kinetic chain is a suspension-based system. Suspension, for me, is defined as stability, right? So if I can stabilize or create leverage, then I can generate force, and that force is going to produce the velocity or moments of momentum, whatever you want to say, right? It's the same damn thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So it's not that you can't get the job done in Knee Valgus.
Listen,
it can happen. The body, because like you said, the body is finding a way to get it done.
It's task oriented, right? Or task based. Think about it like this. We understand that the neurological system is highly adaptive. That means that it's measuring, monitoring, and tracking everything we're doing, right?
Yep.
So if it's doing
it's
that,
explicit. You can say whatever you want.
Okay, all right.
It's rated E.
All right.
Not for everyone. For explicit.
So that's genius. So if it's based on that principle, which I feel like it is, right? That if it's highly adaptive and it's measuring, monitoring, and adjusting to everything that we do, then in spite of our wisdom or lack thereof, it will execute a task. So because it's doing it doesn't mean that that's the efficient way for it to do it. It's just the only way it can do it at the time, right? So, and then for us, right, we are literally techs or mechanics or whatever you want to call yourself, right?
Engineers.
We're engineers, yeah, exactly. Right? We are supposed to tweak the system, right? So that the system can start to move away from where it's at currently toward a more efficient, effective way, right? That's ultimately what we're trying to do. So I don't think Knee Valgus from a 3, 4, 5 scenario is optimal or efficient or effective at all.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's a ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
So
you can't prevent some sort of major issue.
Yeah. That motherfucker will explode at some point, right? Like you can get away with it for a little bit, right? And I think that's what we look at. I think one of the biggest problems that we have in our field and just in science in general, we look at the people who are being successful and then we say, well, you need to be closer to that. And I think looking at successful scenarios are wrong because we're dehumanizing the fact that individual, but that neurologically they can probably do something you and I can't even dream of doing, right? Yeah. So, all right, so then we need to bring it back to a different scenario. We need to think about, hey, things don't need to be perfectly aligned, right? Because I mean, no structure is flawless. Right? I'm not saying that. Here's, I guess, kind of what I look at. When I look at, it's not about perfection, right? Like scapula retracted and,
like statue.
Yeah, I'm not saying perfection in that sense. What I'm saying is precision. Precision means that it has enough robustity to it, right? That it can move and come back. Yeah. Right? To me, Knee Valgus is not moving and coming back. It's moving and staying there. Right? And it's a drop off in force production and or force reduction from the muscular elasticity property or elastic property that it goes straight into that non-elastic tissue, which is more your tendons and joint capsules and getting rid of cartilage and stuff like that. Like it's just not, once it reaches that 3, 4, 5 zone, it's not good. Yeah. Right?
That makes sense. Like the way I kind of was thinking about it, it's like, what other joints can we do that like a similar thing to and expect it to like function well? Like, could you go into like the elbow joint, for example, because it's, you know, halfway in between your wrist and your shoulder, the same way your knee's halfway in between your ankle and your hip. Like, could you do a similar thing at the elbow? Like, could you do like a handstand push-up where all of a sudden in the middle of that,
right,
your elbows are medially deviating and getting some internal rotation? Like, I don't think that would fly.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not apples to apples, but
right.
But just to think like, oh, the knee is that special.
Yeah.
It can do it, but like other joints.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And see, and that's a very good point. I don't think that the knee is special at all,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think, again, the knee is a sacrificial lamb. I really do. I think it's the thing.
It's like the circuit breaker.
Yeah. It says, hey, listen, I have robustity, right? Like, I have movement. I love that word, right? Like, I love that. I don't know what that actually means
like
to me,
robustness,
but yeah, like I'm saying that it has some volume. It has some good bandwidth, okay? But again, that bandwidth, right? You know, you can't let it go too far, right?
Yeah.
Or if a load comes through beyond its capacity, and I think that's the thing that we're missing, right? Like, it is a capacity dominant system, so that means it's just because it can shift and move and reconfigure itself a little bit, right? That doesn't mean that that's the most efficient way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And our ideal thing as practitioners, and that includes us all, right? And what we have to learn to do is to say, hey, yes, it is doing that. And the question should be, is that the most optimal way it should do it? Just because it's doing it, and just because this athlete is having success, we can't think about the moment. We got to think long term. Long term, that's not the way we want it to do it. It's not the way we want it to do it.
That's the tough one, because I think a lot of people are like, I don't have time.
No.
I don't have that time.
Or I don't know how to make the adjustments. I've done what the industry has presented me with. See, that's another thing that we're not talking about either, right? I put the band around them. I've done this or I've done that, and the shit it didn't change. Right?
Yeah.
Because another thing that
there's no robustity.
There's no. Don't do that. I need a shirt. I need a shirt with that. Robustity.
Don't steal it.
Yeah, I'm gonna get a shirt. I'm gonna get Ginger to make me a shirt. Robustity. I got robustity. So you
make me one.
Okay, you got it. You definitely need it because you were here with me. You know, the thing about it is when we look at, you know, talking about there's not many people that understand what to do with, you know, overpronation, right? Mm-hmm. So if the foot, if it's a flat arch, or if it's a collapsed ankle, or if it's a combination of the two, mm-hmm. No one's got answers for that, really, right? Or what about that, you know, pelvofemoral joint or lumbopelvic hip complex? If it's, you know, if it's basically going into, you know, the base of support is the lumbopelvic hip complex is shifting outside the base of support. Or what if it's creating some SI joint issues? Or what if it's trying to run away from, you know, SI joint issues? Mm-hmm. And then I'm even identifying that, like, the contralateral leg can drive more force to create a knee valgus on the contralateral leg that totally gets missed, right? Mm-hmm. And that's another issue, right? Because the entire chain, right, kinetic chain, we know it has synergy. That means it has ipsilateral to contralateral, and it can cross that plane at any given time. Yep. And so it's so much more dynamic than that. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that we need to, because the knee does have a leash, we don't need to let that damn leash out all the way, right? That's the problem. And I think the longer you start to do things, the more comfortable and competent you get at doing it that way, and it's harder to rein you back on it, mm-hmm. unless the car bomb exploded. When the car bomb explodes, like, ooh, shit, I probably should have done something about that, right? I saw that motherfucker parked out there for about 5 weeks straight, and I didn't do anything with it, and all of a sudden it fucked up my neighborhood, right? Like, it's gone. Whole damn block is gone.
Whoop, there it is.
There. Whistle tip. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Yeah, like, you know, so I don't think we need to let Knee Valgus just do what it wants to do.
Yeah.
Just because someone, you know, I mean, that, and again, because I can squat or deadlift 500 pounds with a knee valgus, right? It doesn't mean that the shit is okay. It just means that that is the most mechanically or kinetic incline advantage that my neural setting has. And it goes to that because, you know, I look at these kids and these athletes. One of the things that's happening is if when they're competing, right? And if you are a strength athlete, you're competing with the bar. So it doesn't matter, that is your opponent. When we're competitors, when we compete, whoever and whatever we compete against, right? We always focus on the task and how quickly or our neurological setting starts to gravitate toward the thing that makes us feel strongest. And a lot of times that ends up looking like a knee valgus. So no, we don't need to let that go unchecked, right?
Awesome.
Did that answer your question?
That was plenty for me to think about anyway.
All right, cool.
So, but like, I love having this perspective, and then to be able to follow this up with Joel and talk about, you know, his perspective a little bit.
Yeah,
it's gonna be really interesting.
Yeah, it is, and you know, I love it because I'm really interested to hear, you know, the new things that he's found and the, you know, the examples that he probably has, obviously, of some, you know, some very explosive athletes and see, I really, you know, want to know, and so, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on it.
Yeah, that's being a true scientist, is being open to new evidence and being willing to change your mind when the evidence is compelling enough to do so. So
for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was sweet.
Cool, man.
Thank you so much, Coach.
When are you gonna do your podcast with Joel?
Should be coming up in the next couple weeks.
Okay.
Hopefully soon. We're squaring away dates and times right now to record it, and then it'll be up. And yeah, so everybody stay tuned. It's gonna be really exciting, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, Joel, drop the hammer on this mother. You know what I'm saying?
I hear that. So, alrighty, y'all. Thanks so much for watching and listening. I really appreciate it, and thanks again, Ambrose, for taking the time to have this conversation with me. And everybody, stay tuned. We will see you around.